Thank you. Please be seated. I didn't mention earlier, I should have, that we're going to do communion at the end of the service. So this is a little bit of a bump up to do the message now, but we can handle it. But the reason we're doing that is not just random. It's because, we're sitting at the cross of Jesus. He's still on the cross. The sacrifice is still being made, so it's not time yet to take communion. So during this portion of the service, we'll work our way through the actual sacrifice of Jesus to his death. We'll sit in that for a minute, and then we'll get to communion. So in a way, communion will be the pinnacle of the service today. So we've been going through some of the Easter service, the Easter story last week and the week before, starting with the Palm Sunday and the triumphal entry, and we've talked through some of the stories. And so let's get to the foot of the cross. So today's Friday. Last night, Thursday, is the Last Supper. Jesus in the upper room with his disciples, and he institutes communion as we know it. He also says to Judas, "You're going to betray me." He says to Peter, "You're going to betray me." And then they go to the Garden of Gethsemane. And in the garden, that's where Jesus is praying for the strength to take what is about to be given him. And he asks God to not do it. So if there's any other way to accomplish your purposes rather than me going through this, please let it happen. But Jesus knew in the asking that there wasn't any other way. He encourages the disciples to pray because he knows they're about to go through some stuff too. And like us, they fell asleep. They couldn't quite handle the task that was in front of them. It's probably late in the night. And they just couldn't quite understand what was happening, even though Jesus told them over and over and over again that this was about to happen. Big things were about to happen. And they just fell asleep. Then the noise and the rustling as the soldiers come into the garden. Jesus wakes up the disciples, says, "Well, the hour's come, here it is." And he's arrested. Peter lashes out in anger, chops off the ear of that guy, and Jesus says, "No, I need to do this. I need to be taken from them, and this is not the way that we fight back. We don't fight with power. We don't fight with swords. We fight with submission. We fight with humility." And so he heals that guy's ear, and then Jesus is taken away. He goes through the show trial at Caiaphas' house, then he goes through the show trial at Herod's house, and he's taken for Pontius, and nobody really wants to do what they want to do, and finally Pontius says, "Okay, fine, I'll do it." And interspersed between all this is torture. And then finally the sentence is given, not initially by Pilate, but by the very people who proclaimed him Messiah on Sunday. So today's Friday. That was Sunday. You probably still remember what you had for lunch on Sunday. It's not that far gone. But that's what's shifted. So much has shifted in Jerusalem in this 1 week that the very same crowd who is taking off their clothes and trying to find palm branches so that the Messiah doesn't step on the road, they then say, "Crucify him." And Pontius Pilate realizes that if he doesn't go along with this, then I might have a riot on my hands. So Jesus is crucified kind of unwillingly by the Romans because the people demanded it. And so as we come to the cross, I want to think about what must it have been like for Jesus? What was it like for Jesus at the triumphal entry, knowing what was going to happen? What was it like for Jesus in the garden to watch his disciples fall asleep? And then after their really failed attempt to protect him, they run away. All of them run away. And he's alone. Through the trials, through the beatings, he's all alone. What was it like for Jesus? What was it like for the disciples who were sure Jesus was the Messiah, but they were also sure what the Messiah was supposed to do? And Jesus, in the end, didn't do any of those things. all of their hope was in Jesus. They were just hoping for the wrong things. And so when they run away, they scatter. Peter denies. Only John is brave enough to turn up at the foot of the cross. And so now we come to the foot of the cross with John, with Mary, the mother of Jesus, with Mary Magdalene, with some other women. John is the only man brave enough to show up. All the women are there, but only John of the disciples is there. And now let's look at what Jesus says from the cross. These are the 7 sayings of Jesus, it's called, or the last words, it's also called. And in Tenebrae services, it's sometimes useful to go through these, to think about what these statements mean, the context of them, what they meant then and what they can mean to us now. So the first thing that Jesus says from the cross is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We don't need to go into the grisly details of all the things that he is physically suffering right now. And his thought is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I say that very flatly, very unemotionally. We could be pretty sure that that's not the way he said it. Because he was in pain. In very, very real pain, being inflicted by these people he's praying for. In context, the them is probably the Roman soldiers who are actually physically the ones beating the nails in, but also the crowd who has betrayed him. Also John, who ran away. And also us. The very reason Christ has to be on the cross is because of our own sin, our own collective sin, our own individual sins. And from the cross, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Then he has an interaction with somebody else who's being crucified, where this one thief, he says, I deserve this, and you don't. He's apparently been around Jerusalem a little bit. He understands what's happening here. This is political. This is a political murder. It's not, it's not a righteous, justified death like his. And he recognizes that. And Jesus says to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Again, think of the pain and the suffering that Jesus is in. If there was ever a moment that you'd be justified to be a little self-centered, it would be when you're being executed and tortured to death. And in that moment, Jesus reaches out to the guy next to him going through the same thing and gives him hope. What a powerful thing that is. And that is the same offer that's continually given to us, continually given to this world. And it doesn't matter what stage of life you're in, the offer is there to the end. Jesus and that guy were hours away from death. And the offer is there. For him, the offer is there for us. And as we're sitting in the crowd at the foot of the cross, Mary's with us, and Jesus looks down and he sees his mother. And again, rather than being a little bit focused on, my own problems, he's got some problems he could focus on. He thinks, who's going to take care of mom? And he sees, only John showed up. Okay. And he says to Mary, woman, here is your son. And then he says to John, here is your mother. You've probably heard it before. To call his mother woman is not insulting. It doesn't have any connotations. It's very, very respectful. Showing his mother great respect, both with the title that he uses, but then also making sure that she is cared for going forward. Mom, your oldest son, I'm about to die. This guy's going to take care of you. You better take care of her because, that's Jesus' mom. Don't want to mess that up. But what we have here in all three of them is Jesus outwardly focused. The first three statements are all outwardly focused. Forgive these people for doing what they're doing to me. You'll be with me in paradise. Don't worry, just get through this. And Mom, I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. All that with all the suffering on top of him. And that's just the physical suffering. The next statement, he cries out in anguish, my God, why have you forsaken me? And theologically, we take this to be kind of the moment when, even though Jesus himself is sinless, the moment when the sins of all of us are placed on him. And in that moment, there's a separation that there's never been before in all of eternity. Jesus and God the Father and the Holy Spirit have coexisted for all eternity. And in this moment, there has to be a separation because our sin is put on Jesus. Think about the closest person to you. Whoever that may be, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a friend. Think about just in a split second, boom, it's gone. You're completely isolated from each other. And in that moment, you're not sure if you're ever going to see him again. Now take that feeling and amplify by about 1,000. And maybe we're getting close to what Jesus felt in that moment. So there's a really great case to be made that the spiritual, emotional suffering of Christ was greater than the physical suffering. And this is the moment where it comes out, where Jesus acknowledges the pain that he's in. And the pain isn't physical. He's not complaining about physical pain. He's complaining about the spiritual, emotional pain of being separated from the Father. And then finally, after who knows how many hours, he succumbs to his flesh and thinks about what's actually happening in his body, and he says, oh, I'm thirsty. And this is a reminder that he was physically there on the cross. Jesus was both fully God and fully man, and that man part was on a cross for hours on a Friday afternoon, hung up there. And he said, I'm a little thirsty, guys. Somebody goes and tries to get them some vinegar, and he doesn't take it, maybe because it will deaden the pain, I don't know, but he's over that. And then finally we get to the last two, where he says, it is finished, where he acknowledges that the sacrifice is complete. This had to happen. For there to be reconciliation between man and God, between us and God, this had to happen. And so there is a moment, there's a moment in time when prior to we could not have communion with God. We could not be joined with God intimately. And then post, it's there. It's open. The relationship that we have with God to pray, to enter his throne room in prayer, to take communion, that was not available to people prior to that moment right then. Because the sacrifice, the blood of Christ, at that moment is when it becomes available to us. He had to die. And then he finishes it with, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. We really don't know what Jesus knew about what was going to come. We really don't know a whole lot about what happened between the death and the resurrection. There's different church traditions and different scriptures that you could pull from. But it was over, and he died. Now think about John and Mary and the other women seeing that death. The Pharisees were taunting him during death saying, oh, well, call down some angels. You said you're the Messiah, call down some angels and you'll be saved. And there's probably a little bit of John, a little bit of some of the disciples who thought, yeah, it's any moment now. Any moment now, he's going to turn this around and the angels will come and Jerusalem will be a great kingdom again. And then he died. All hope that John had been building for 3 years knowing Jesus, that Mary had been hiding in her heart since the birth of Jesus, that different people who Jesus had touched through his ministry, they thought it was all over. Other people had come prior to Jesus and claimed to be the Messiah, and they all died. Handful of people would get excited about it, and then that guy would die. And here is Jesus dying, just like the rest of them. Now we know what happens. But sit in that moment of what would it be like if Jesus just died? What would be our humanity? What would be the state of the world if Jesus had just died? That's a dark, dark place. And that's why we call it a tenebrae service. Because it's darkness. Now, the way we're going to do this service, this is a time of reflection. So I'm going to walk you through what's going to happen over the next couple of minutes, and we're going to get through it to the end. And maybe God will meet you in this place of darkness, in this place of silence. So in a minute, I'm going to read a liturgy. This is a book called Every Moment Holy by Douglas McGelvey. And this is volume 2. There's 3 volumes. And these are Protestant liturgies. These are liturgies that see that every moment is holy. There's a liturgy in here for changing a diaper. There's all kinds of weird stuff in there, but there's also some really good ones. And so we're going to do the liturgy that's titled Tenebrae. And it's kind of heavy. So we're going to read through that liturgy. And then Jaira's going to play some music. Just on the piano, no words. And I want you to sit in that thought of Jesus dying on the cross and the words that you hear in this liturgy. And as Jaira plays, I'm going to slowly blow out these candles. This candle represents the life of Christ. And I'm going to blow it out because Jesus died. And when I do, any kids in the room, does anybody know what happened when Jesus died? Like in that moment. Somebody say something? Back. Yes, the earth shook and there was no light. Exactly. So we're blowing out the candle so there's no light, and we're also going to make a noise. This is real, I promise. Everybody, when I blow out that candle, Jaira's going to stop playing, and everybody make a noise. If you have a book, you can close it. You can stomp the ground. You can clap your hand. Just one noise. And then we're going to sit in silence for 90 seconds. And don't worry about your kids. If your kids start playing up or anything, that's not a problem. But everybody just sit in silence and just see what happens. And I recognize that this is a heavy space. We're talking about death. And if that's heavy for you, then see what God has for you there. And after the service, please come and talk to me or some of the other pastoral leaders if you want to talk through some of the things that happened in that silence. So what I want to do is I want to practice first. Okay, so everybody think through, what are you going to do for your loud noise? Are we ready? Okay, pretend I've blown out these candles. We're on the Christ candle, and now I'm going to blow it out. Very good. Very good. Very good. You see, that's why we practiced. All right, and then after the loud noise, we will... There we go. After the loud noise, we'll sit in silence for a few seconds, and then I'll come up and we'll transition to communion. Because we don't sit in that space of no hope. Because guess what? Jesus was more than just those other guys. He didn't just die. He did something else. And we get to celebrate that on Sunday. All right, so I'm going to read this. It is a little long for a reading, but it's just so beautiful. So this is a prayer of intercession against the kingdom of death. The human heart, apart from your light, O Lord, is lost in those dark shadows cast by death. The human heart, apart from your love, will drink itself to ruin on the wine of unholy communions of hate, of envy, of fear, of prejudice, of pride, of greed, of resentment, of self-pity, of envious entitlement and rage, and every other ugliness that festers in the wounds of a broken race. This is our unlawful claim, unbound by the embattled trenches of our rebellions. Here is our broken kingdom, shoddily established, ever precarious, beset by endless war, propped up by a usurped power, preserved only by the spilling of blood, peopled by cracked women and splintered men. A world swerving wildly through the guardrails and over the precipice of anything good and true. This is our illegitimate puppet kingdom, freewheeling, death-dealing, downward spiraling, making it up as we go, fashioning the world in our own shattered image and unto our own twisted ends. We see its fruits anew every day, fruits of cruelty, horror, atrocity. This kingdom of ours is demarcated by a dark line that runs not between the peoples it divides, but along the fault line of every human heart, dividing us even from ourselves. Pressed together, we writhe and seethe and teem with chaos and disorder, debased as dogs, scrabbling for scraps, but blind enough at the same time to somehow still believe ourselves above all rightful authority, insisting against all evidence that we will, by our strength, our intellect, our goodness, our inevitable progress, build some better Babel apart from you, O God. Does creation laugh or weep when those fragile structures collapse beneath the impossible weight of our ambitions, and all that we are left with the orphans, the widows and widowers, the grieving parents, the bombed-out villages, the ruined communities, the uninhabitable spaces, the tortures, extortions, executions, gross injustices, tyrants, and victims who, so long force-fed on resentment, often reveal themselves as cruel as their oppressors, the terrorists of every stripe, the users of others, the abusers, the statisticians who deal in the demonic economies of collateral damage, the ones who make the world less hospitable, who plunder and desecrate your creation in service of their own greed, those who inhumanely employ human shields, the enslavers, the exploiters, the manipulators and pirates and profiteers, those parasites of suffering. These are all evidence and the inevitable outworking of the human kingdom, upbuilding itself, doing violence to reality while tearing its own fabric apart. This is the abode of an insatiable absence, the haunt of abominations, now briefly occupied by this clamoring, misbegotten, piecemeal nation formed of the enemies of all flourishing, united only in our allegiance to death's spread and sprawl, wittingly or unwittingly effected in and through us all. This is the human kingdom, now unmasked as the inhuman kingdom. This is the inhuman kingdom revealed at last as the kingdom of death. To call death natural is a lie. To spin it as but one more spoke upon a wheel of life is to ignore the groaning cry of your creatures, O Christ. Death is a catastrophe, an obscene enemy, a poisoned arrow piercing the eye of creation, twisting history and nations, bereaving lovers, warping the constellations of community, of family, of flourishing. And each of us has played our guilty part. For we men and women who in our sin first sought God-likeness, ushered in instead futility and dread, long ago destroying our own immortal thrones in the very act by which we sought to crown ourselves as sovereigns of ourselves. And every generation since has learned at what expense such liberation came. Death is the rock upon which every raging wave of human pride is dashed and proven impotent and tragicomic. Like runners stumbling at the starting gun, snapping bone and tumbling face first into mud, we have lapsed absurdly short of the glory of God, distorting each facet of the divine image we were given to reflect. We have twisted those glories first displayed in us into the debasements of a billion idolatries, tyrannies, and pornographies, until we are finally and hopelessly imprisoned in the twisting pilings of our own wrecked innocence. What we now call life is rife with sickness and death, a world where each of us must learn to make the best of the hollows bereft of ones we've loved. A squalid shanty town of tattered souls whose ragged holes are visible, however desperately we try to hide our insufficiencies even from ourselves. And when the darkness parts just long enough that for an instant we perceive our monstrous need, the horror of the things we have become and done and left undone, held up against the light of God, reduces us, deluges us, enrages us, and breaks our hearts and drives us to despair. For the settling weight of such a great conviction is more than we can bear. To see ourselves defined in stark relief, too wretched, enslaved, and powerless to effect our own release or absolution. Where then is our hope, if we have hope at all? Who will rescue us now from this kingdom of death with which we have so long aligned? These toxic roots and thorny vines in which we've grown so desperately entangled, so deeply entwined in deed and heart and lineage and mind, we have no hope. Where is our hope? This can be a tough space to sit in, to think about. The last thing that I said was we have no hope. But we know that that isn't true. Thanks to Christ and Him rising again, we do have hope. And even though the world, as we look around it, looks a lot like the way I described it in that liturgy, we have a hope. When I was a kid, my grandmother, she handmade all of the crackers that we would use for our communion. They were delicious. They were so good. We lived next door to my grandma's house, so we could smell whenever she was cooking. And we would usually just sneak on over. And we knew when she was making the communion wafers, we probably weren't supposed to sneak some of those. But we did anyway. And we thought we were really crafty. And I'm sure now as an adult that she knew exactly what we were doing. They were just so delicious the way she made them. And at church for the grape juice, we used Welch's Concord grape juice, which I know you guys don't think a lot about American food, and probably rightly so. But if you ever get a chance to have Welch's Concord grape juice, it's 100% grape juice, and it is delicious. And communion, every time when I was a kid, tasted really good. It tasted so good. Then sometime around high school, we switched, like a lot of places, I meant to grab one, to the little cups, you know? And I'm not trying to have a go at anybody, but that thing that they call a cracker at the top, yeah, it's a bit tasteless, isn't it? It's kind of bleh. And the liquid that's in there, you can't really call that juice. Like that's just, that's generic juice. That's probably what you think I was drinking in America. Really bland, that communion. And it's interesting because around that time that's what I felt like in church. When I was a kid, everything was really exciting and new, and I loved the stories, and it tasted really good. And then as I got older and older in the church, it was kind of as boring, the same stuff over and over again. And it's interesting that the communion changed. I had another communion. When I was in university, I did a semester abroad in Indonesia. And we went out to a rural village. We spent most of our time in a town on Java, but then we went out to a rural village, and it was just me by myself. I was the only white skin. Sorry, I don't have any word for that except for white skin. It was just me and Indonesians. I spoke hardly any Indonesian. They spoke hardly any English, and they brought me into their home and showed me their village. And so then we went to the Sunday service, and we had communion. And right as communion was served, the mosque literally across the street started blaring the call to prayer. Now, I'd been in Indonesia for a few months then, and my very first thought was, this is not the time for the call to prayer. And afterwards, I talked to them, and I said, well, what's that all about? And they said, oh, yeah, they watch. They watch for when we do communion, and then they play the call to prayer much louder than normal, just to disrupt. And they would only let us build the church right across the street from the mosque. And I noticed that the mosque leaders were sitting at the door of the mosque, and they had their notebooks out. And somebody came over and asked me for my name. I was like, what's all this about? They're tracking. They're tracking exactly who goes to church, how often they go to church, so that if Sharia law comes to Indonesia, they've got all the evidence that they need, which was horrifying to me. But that communion, the bread was really stale, possibly moldy. And the cup, the way they did it is everybody held up the cup. And so I got the cup and I held it up, and as it got to about here, I realized that they had made their own kind of homebrew kind of stuff, It's like rubbing alcohol. And I'm thinking, I've got to get this down with a straight face. Like I can't sputter, I just got to get this down. Like this is their communion, I got to do this, right? And so I take it, and it burned all the way down. And later they had me come up and introduce myself, and I felt like I was just breathing alcohol fumes on them all from this little shot of communion juice or something. But that is what it was for them. Christianity for them is a burning pain. And so between those 3 communions, I reckon that's where your life is. Maybe right now, communion is sweet. It's a beautiful thing. And when you come to communion, you're coming to my grandmother's crackers and some great grape juice. Maybe for you, sitting in Australia, Christianity is hard. That's real. Maybe external pressures, maybe internal pressures, maybe family, maybe work, maybe whatever. It's hard. And you're drinking that straight 100% ethanol, and it hurts every time. Or maybe a lot of us, we take communion and it tastes like nothing. The cracker hits our tongue and immediately dissolves, and we're not really sure that we've had anything, just leaves a little bit of gummy in our mouth. We taste the juice. The only way we know that it's supposed to be grape is because it's been dyed purple. Is that where your faith is at? In that moment of silence that we just had, I pray that Jesus came to you, God came to you in that moment, and wherever you are, that he encouraged you, that he drew you a little bit closer, that your faith could become a little bit more tasty, that it could be a little bit more joyful, whether you're in apathy in your faith or whether you're in strife in your faith, that God can pull you to my grandmother's crackers, because they're really tasty. And that's what Jesus wants for you, regardless of your circumstances. Whether things are going great for you right now, whether things are not going great. That's what Jesus wants. So as the servers come up, there are going to be some people here in the corners, around and in the back. And they've got the communion. We here, if you haven't been here before, the way we do communion, everybody gets up and goes to one of the servers, whoever's closest. And you can either take a bit of cracker and dip that in the juice and then take that back to your seat and take that whenever you want. Or you can get one of those packets that I just, really, really sold you on, that you really want to have now. Those are available. They're all gluten-free. And regardless of what it actually tastes like, ask yourself the question of what does your spiritual life taste like? And where can you meet Jesus to pull you into something that tastes better?